Now we've got the North Carolina Supreme Court Justice up for re-election this year, Justice Allison Riggs. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
So there's obviously a lot of attention on North Carolina this year, but there's also a lot of attention across the country on state Supreme Court races. Why is it so critical that we focus our attention on the Supreme Court in North Carolina? What's at stake in your state immediately?
Well, I'll say it's not just my state. The U.S. Supreme Court has taken actions in recent years that have made state Supreme Courts even more important. First, the U.S. Supreme Court punted on the question of partisan gerrymandering. They said federal courts can't do anything about it, but state courts acting in interpreting state constitutions maybe can. So the issue of gerrymandering, at least partisan gerrymandering, is squarely in front of every state court at best, if it's going to be a problem that's addressed. The other issue that has increased the stakes for state Supreme Court races is that in overturning Roe v. Wade in 22, overturning 50 years of precedent, the U.S. Supreme Court said they were sending the issue of abortion and reproductive freedom back to the states, which means not only are state legislatures changing laws, but state Supreme Courts are being asked to decide what kinds of reproductive freedoms women enjoy state by state. So nationally, state Supreme Courts are more important than they've ever been. Here in North Carolina, we have seen since 2022 a conservative takeover of our courts and a lot of changed action when it comes to our rights. And we are working very hard this year to help North Carolinians see that the courts can be a place where rights are protected and granted, not chipped away at. And so we know that issues from public education to voting rights, to environmental justice, to justice system reform. These are all issues that our North Carolina Supreme Court is going to be squarely dealing with, but it's going to take us a minute to dig ourselves out of the hole that we've dug ourselves into. And we are right now working to win back our courts in the 2028 election before the next round of redistricting. We cannot flip our courts this year, but if we don't hold my seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court, we can't win back our courts before the next round of redistricting.
So as far as reproductive rights are concerned, what's the state of abortion rights in North Carolina right now?
So since Dobbs, there's been some movement. There's no case currently pending in front of me. We have a gubernatorial candidate running on changing his story from time to time, but essentially running to totally ban abortion. And the
Yeah.
question for North Carolina voters is, who's going to stand up for women and their ability to protect their own health care. So my opponent who is someone who served on the Court of Appeals, and he signed on to an opinion last year, since withdrawn, that said life begins at conception. That's the same legal logic that when the Alabama Supreme Court issued it, women lost access to health care, IVF treatments mid-cycle. So if they
Yeah.
had eggs retrieved, hormones injected mid-cycle. So the question for North Carolina voters is, who can you trust with your reproductive freedom? Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. My opponent is someone that I think we cannot trust, particularly in light of attacks on reproductive freedoms coming from other branches of government.
Why is this issue important to you especially? Do you have a personal stake in this issue?
I do. I'm the youngest woman to ever serve on the North Carolina Supreme Court and the only woman of childbearing age on any of our appellate courts. So as a matter of principle, I think directly affected people should be at the table when decisions are made. And don't you want a woman who knows what this feels like to have her body be the subject of debate. Second is
Right.
I'm newlywed. My husband and I met a little bit later in life and we hope to start a family, but I'm 43 years old. And so that's not guaranteed. I'm a high risk pregnancy, could very well suffer miscarriage and need emergency treatment. To get pregnant, I may need access to IVF and other reproductive health care. Across the South, in particular, we're seeing women die because
Right.
doctors are afraid to provide them emergency health care when they are losing a pregnancy. So this is this is life and death for my family, and for so many other families across North Carolina. And I hope to be a voice for them, letting them grow and take care of their families in safety and in peace.
Another issue that I focus on especially heavily that I think has major implications for the entire country is fair maps, and you had mentioned that before. What are the implications for fair maps as far as the state Supreme Court is concerned in North Carolina right now?
Yeah, well, this is an issue that I've spent my career focusing on too. I was a voting rights attorney before joining the bench. I spent 15 years fighting gerrymandering in all its forms, racial, partisan, violations of the Voting Rights Act. I did a lot of work combating partisan gerrymandering. I actually argued the case in the United States Supreme Court, Common Cause v. Rucho, where the Supreme Court declined to enforce the federal Constitution in protecting voters' ability to cast votes in districts that were, not predetermined from before they went to the ballot box. So I then also argued the case in the North Carolina Supreme Court, Harper v. Hall, where a previous court, a court with a justice-minded majority, said that extreme partisan gerrymandering violates North Carolina's constitutional guarantee of free elections. Free elections doesn't just mean no cover charge. It of course means that as well, but it means unrestricted, unhindered, unrigged. And then I knew the day after the November 22 elections that despite the fact that we'd won that landmark case, that we'd gotten fair maps for the first time in a long time in North Carolina, that decision was likely to fall by the wayside. And unfortunately, I was right. And the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned that decision. We had new maps drawn for the 24 elections, congressional and state legislative. Our congressional map right now, we are represented by 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans. In Congress, and we are a very purple, very 50-50 state. We think it is likely after these elections that it'll be either 10-4 or 11-3 Republican Democrat. So there's no case pending in front of me right now, but obviously North Carolina is a state where redistricting historically has been litigated every cycle. And we know that we will have a new census in 2030. North Carolina is growing rapidly. And I am committed to making sure that we have people on the bench who are willing to enforce the Constitution without fear or favor, because unless we have a multiracial, participatory, inclusive democracy where voters are picking their representatives rather than politicians picking their voters, our democracy doesn't work.
And I believe that in a cycle where more states have adopted fair maps, where it's gone in that direction, North Carolina is one of, if not the only states that has backslid to the extent that it has. Another reason that North Carolina is in the news, in case you thought you would get away without having to discuss Mark Robinson in this interview, is because of what he said in his recent comments. So I guess, first off, what was your reaction to hearing some of what he said?
Yeah, I mean, it was more ugly, more hateful, but this is what we have heard from Mark Robinson for years. This is who that man is, and it's who Republicans picked to lead their ticket. But what we have seen in North Carolina since then is a lot of folks, deleting their pictures with Mark Robinson, but
Yeah.
refusing to disavow him. And if you are not willing to say plainly, without qualification, that racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and hate have no place in our government, not in our executive branch, not in our legislative branch, and not in our judicial branch, do not have the character to lead. You are unfit to serve the people of this state.
Perfectly put. Justice Riggs, how can we help your campaign?
This is North Carolina. The races are going to be 50-50, maybe not the gubernatorial race, but every other one is going to be down to the wire. All of my polling is within the margins. Folks can go to my website. It's riggsforourcourts.com, and donate. You can go to my website and see my ad. My ad is about reproductive freedom and fighting for families like mine and other North Carolinians. We need to get that ad on as many screens across North Carolina as possible. And we are going to be raising resources to the very last minute to get that message across so that when North Carolinians go into the ballot box and vote, they understand that their power is up and down the ballot and that they have the power to make North Carolina a place where women can live, thrive, families can make important decisions for themselves. And this is a North Carolina worth fighting for.
Well, I should note for people who've been voting to other races across the country, these national races obviously are important, but your dollars go a lot farther in smaller races that often get overlooked. So very important to donate if you have the opportunity to. I'll put the link in the post description of this video and in the show notes of the podcast. Justice Riggs, thank you so much for taking the time and best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Brian. Really grateful for you.